Washington's clear-thinking headquarters. The Morning Majority, 5 to 9 on 630 WMAL.
7:37 on WMAL. This is the Morning Majority. Brian Eamon, Mary Catherine Hand for the Daily Caller in this morning. Pleased to be joined now by Carolyn Glick, senior columnist from the Jerusalem Post. Great to have you back on the show, Carolyn.
Thanks. Great to be on, Brian.
We've been talking, obviously, here in this country a lot about Libya in the last couple of weeks, but I wanted to ask you first about Egypt. With these elections looming, where do you see the fate of the Egyptian government going right now?
Well, I think that the direction in Egypt is very, very clear, which is that we are witnessing what many people, particularly in Israel, were warning, which was that the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the only organized political force in Egypt, aside from the Al-Assad regime, is now taking control of the country.
It is taking control of the country, and you think that they will have control? If not, do they have control now, even?
Well, I mean, it's pretty clear that the Muslim Brotherhood is influencing the decisions of the Egyptian army to a very significant degree. I mean, the arrest of Mubarak and his sons is something that the military would never have done if it weren't massively impacted by what the Muslim Brotherhood wants. They have stopped cooperating with Israel and limiting in cordoning off Hamas, the terrorist organization that's an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza. They stopped building a wall to prevent smuggling between the Egyptian Sinai and Gaza. And they're threatening to go to war with Israel if Israel decides to defend itself against Hamas's massive missile barrage against southern Israel. So Egypt, and they're also getting very close to Iran, which is allied with the Muslim Brotherhood. So all indicators are that Egypt has already switched sides, and with each passing day, it's becoming more and more clear how dangerous it is.
Well, I wonder what your thoughts on the Arab Spring in general, and sort of, there seem to be some slightly encouraging points where at least many of the citizens of these countries were finally blaming, I don't know, like Mubarak and their own dictators instead of Israel and America for everything. But, you know, those things tend to fade when Muslim Brotherhood takes over. What's your take on the whole region and whether there is any real sort of uprising here?
There is an uprising. It's an uprising of the people against the jackboot, against tyranny. Unfortunately, for a lot of different reasons. One has to do with the biases, the pro-Iranian biases of Qatar, which runs Al Jazeera. Some of it has to do with the cowardice of the West. But the only uprisings that seem to be toppling regimes that are allied with the United States, like the one in Tunisia and Mubarak in Egypt, and as a result, the sole beneficiaries so far have been the Muslim Brotherhood, whereas when you see uprisings like Iran and Syria, not only are the uprisings themselves not being covered in Al Jazeera, which support these regimes, but they're not being helped by the United States, which was very quick to step forward and demand that its most stalwart ally in the Middle East, Hosni Mubarak, be forced to leave office.
I know you're disappointed that the United States didn't support Mubarak, but when you look at Syria and Bashar Assad, which I always thought was a bad player. I mean, that's what we had been hearing for quite some time. Does the Israeli government want Bashar Assad to stay in power, or is a regime change in the best interest of Israel and Syria?
I think that regime change in Syria is in the best interest of everybody, because even if, I mean, this is a regime that is a colony essentially of Iran. They are massive supporters of Al-Qaeda and Hamas and Hezbollah, so that even if they're overthrown by the Muslim Brotherhood or some variant thereof, that regime is not going to be any worse than the current one is. And so, and it will probably be much longer because it'll take a new regime some period to consolidate its rule. So I think that actually, despite the fact that the Syrian regime wears suits instead of jalbiyas, it's pretty clear that there is no actual distinction between the politics that we're seeing from Syria under Assad than what we would see if it were run by Iran or directly or by Hezbollah or what have you.
Okay.
I want to ask you about the Goldstone Report, too, just because I think it's helpful to reiterate that this has been basically retracted by the author. Mm-hmm. The Human Rights Council in 2009, the illustrious UN Human Rights Council, appointed Richard Goldstone to do this study of the Gaza hostilities of 2008, 2009, and decide, you know, if Israel had committed these horrible war crimes. It was, of course, totally one-sided in its mandate. He went out and finds, lo and behold, that they did, and they targeted civilians. And what Then Richard Goldstone this year on April 1st, April Fool's Day, interestingly enough,
So, oops.
says in the Washington Post, "Oops, sorry about that whole thing. I was incorrect." What kind of damage did this do, and is there any clawing back on it?
Look, it did a massive amount of damage to Israel because it said that Goldstone and the UN and their kangaroo court said that Israel is actually more of a lawbreaker than Hamas, which is a genocidal terrorist organization that is run by Iran. And so, it was absolutely demented. The entire thing was morally depraved and a legal travesty from the perspective of international law. And really what it was indicative of just how inverted the discourse on the Middle East really is. It's just a complete inversion of reality where good is evil and evil is good and white is black and black is white. So right now, after he's had sort of a mealy-mouthed repudiation in the Washington Post column, I think that we're seeing a very strong and concerted effort by Israel to push it back. Will it be? I think what he's done is he's enabled Israel to really more forcefully counter the massive push and campaign by the UN, by the left, and by the Muslim world to criminalize it and demonize it and try to ignore all the pathologies of Arab politics and everything that happens there. By pretending that Israel is a threat to global security.
Let me ask you one more question before I let you go on Libya, because I know you always have the ear to the ground. These rebels that we are wondering whether or not we can trust, what's your intelligence on these rebels, and who are they, and whether or not it's in the best interest of the U.S. and Israel for them to take over?
Well, it's very clear from the U.S. military's own reporting that the largest per capita contribution of al-Qaeda forces from and the Arab world to the insurgency in Iraq came from eastern Libya, which is where the rebels are from. And it's very clear that al-Qaeda in the Maghreb headquartered in and around Benghazi, so that even the U.S. military has acknowledged that there are elements of al-Qaeda fighting within the rebel organization, such as it is in Libya. So the United States and NATO are, in fact, assisting rebels that have ties to al-Qaeda, which is in and of itself disturbing. In Israel, what we're concerned about is that the rebels have taken over a lot of the arms caches of the Libyan military, and that a lot of these have already been transferred to terrorist groups and are being smuggled into Gaza through Egypt. So there's already, from the Israeli angle, there's already been very harsh consequences to this, which is the transfer of advanced anti-aircraft guns to Hamas from Libya.
Carolyn, always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming on the show. We appreciate your insight.